What's an education worth? It's not just parents and students who have to weigh up costs and benefits. These days, with globalization, it's also nations. France has been in the throes of student protests against a spectacular tuition hikes for foreign students. They currently pay little more than the nominal fee of their French counterparts. This in a nation where the right to higher education is written into the Constitution. Many of the 325,000 foreign students in this country say they fear they won't afford to return next fall. The government insists the hike for foreigners had to be done to bring the country more in line with fees elsewhere. Will the increases scare away, though, foreign students and dent France's ambition of attracting 500,000 foreigners a year within the next decade? Amid the scramble to attract the brightest minds from around the globe, what are France's selling points? And how does this country hold on to the bright minds that it's groomed? Parallel to the tuition fee row, there's alarm over the drop in tenured research positions. Authorities say they want to instead invest in postdoctoral students, a reform that is an overdue reality check of what is feasible or short-sighted bean counting that could undermine France's soft power. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the row over raising foreign student tuition. With us, Ilana Sicurel. She's in charge of culture and education at Emmanuel Macron's party, La République En Marche, at the National Executive Committee.
Bonjour.
Thank you for being with us. Thanks as well to Corinne Ekman, coordinator of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's Education at a Glance report.
Good evening.
But you've promised me that you don't write it all by yourself.
No, just a part.
Okay. Manos Antoninis is director at the Global Education Monitoring Report at the UN's Education, Science and Culture branch, UNESCO, who's headquartered here in Paris. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Daniela Suzanibar Rosas, undergraduate law student at the University of Paris 1, and you hail from Peru?
Yeah, it's true. Good evening.
And what brought you to France?
Actually, the cost of the education.
The cost of the education was a main factor.
Yeah, and the position in the ranking.
The position in the ranking for the University of Paris.
Yeah.
All right. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. The government insists there'll be a grandfather clause for those that who are like Daniela and who are already enrolled. But if you're applying out of high school or going from, say, undergraduate to postgraduate, beware. Those student fees are going to rise from 170 euros a year for undergraduate at Daniela's level to 2,770. And there you see the fees for graduate, postgraduate students. The 2,770 euros, will you be able to afford it?
No, I won't be able to afford it. Now I came here with a plan, and the thing is, even if I would pay the same the next year, when I go to master degree, I won't be able to pay that amount of money. And I think this law is going to have a negative effect, because that's why I came to France, because I wanted a multicultural education here. And
did you speak French before coming?
Yeah, I speak French during almost all my life. It was difficult too, but I mean, that's why I came, because I love the countries that bet for a multicultural education, and I think that we are scared. We're scaring the students, like the foreign students, away.
All right, that's certainly what we heard when there were recent marches organized by those students. They came out in the streets of Paris.
There are already a number of restrictions for students. We need to pay large amounts of money. University is anything but free. Right now, with a massive increase in tuition fees for non-EU students, it'll become impossible for many of them to come and study here. I study at the Latin American Institute, for example. 30% of students there are from Latin America. And if this reform passes, our institute will no longer mean anything.
By being here, I hope that the government will be more understanding. We believe this measure is unfair and discriminatory, and we hope the government will change its mind.
Ilana Sicurel, what would you answer to those students?
I want to say that the name of this strategy, this new strategy, is Welcome to France. So this is very important to remember, because all the idea is, of course, to keep, and not only to keep our rank, because we are now the most popular country in welcoming the students in the non-Anglophone countries. We are the first and the fourth in the whole world. So the idea, of course, is to keep this rank and even to improve and to have more students. The aim is to have something. Today we have more than 300,000, and we want to boost to 500,000.
So why the tuition fee hike?
So there is a diagnostic that we cannot avoid. The situation is that we are losing our attractiveness. We used to belong to the 20 countries that see the number of students increase, international students increase, and it is no more the case. So if we are lucid, we see that we are losing this attractiveness. And the idea is to improve this attractiveness, not only to keep it, but to improve it, while, and this is very important, without sacrificing our tradition of solidarity. So the idea is to triple the number of scholarships, so that students that cannot afford the studies, to pay the studies, can come to France.
Right,
but we are, I mean, the jump is quite impressive when you describe it, but to understand it, you have to understand that the situation now is both absurd and unfair, because you cannot compare the situation of a family who has always paid the taxes in France, and an international student who can come from a well-off family and that pay almost nothing. So we remain in very reasonable fees because it will represent a third of the real cost, and it's much less than what you have in the other countries. But the idea is really to triple the number of scholarships, so
From
that
7 to 21,000.
Well, yes,
21,000. Exactly. But if you're aiming to get 500,000 students, that's not a great number of scholarships, is it?
But we consider that it's there is a consultation. So this is what we think is useful, is needed. But we ask, and the minister has asked to all the president d'université, the president to let us know if more is needed. But that's what we evaluate at this point. And I think that it is very important, because when you welcome in bad conditions, it's not, we have to improve the way students are accompanied in terms of housing, in terms of also having better courses of French as a foreign language, and also courses taught in foreign language, because there is just one point maybe to add, is that if we want to help Francophonie, we have to attract not only students like you, and it's fantastic that speak already French, but also students that will come for the quality of what we are offering and will become a French speaker in France. So this is very important.
How do you keep Daniela,
but we need money for that.
How do you keep Daniela in France when she finishes her undergraduate degree and has to go to a graduate degree and can't afford it?
I think that, first of all, there will be a special attention to all the students who are in course of studying. So first of all. And second, we will analyze the situation. I mean, it's not now the room to do it, but of course, each situation will be considered. And I hope she will continue.
On a case-by-case basis. Daniela, your thoughts on this?
I really, until now, I don't understand how it's a welcome project to level up the amount of money we are going to pay. I mean, I will never pay that much money to study where I study. I know the building. It had not been renovated in at least 30 years. If I would pay that amount of money, I will go to another country now, or just go home. And that's the problem now, that, as you said, you are planning to examine each case. But the problem is that the people that is already studying here. It's not my case because I'm going to the third year now, but the people that goes to the bachelor degree, to a master degree, it's already here, and they are going to have to go, and they came with a plan. That's the problem now. I have my cousin, for example. I love him, but if we examine the money, we only can work here, have a part-time. That will be 600 euros per month. And it will be impossible to pay 250. That is like the amount of money we have to pay in a year, in 12 months, and live here. That's why it's impossible. It's impossible. And the thing is that if we want to talk about economics, we come here, we study here, but we only not study here. We work here. We pay our rent. We move the economy here. There's like these little cities in France that only works because they are student cities. And if there's not foreign students that are going to study here, that would be impossible to have the economy in those cities, for example.
All right, let's get an idea here of costs. Corinne Ekman, compared to other OECD nations, do foreign students get a good or bad deal here? And do you take the point made by Ileana Sicurel that France is well below the curve when it comes to how much they make foreign students pay?
Yeah, for now they pay the same amount as national student, and France is part of the country for which there is low tuition fees and low financial support to students too. So this is something that could change if it's increased. We should say that it's not the first country who are doing that. There is other country who decide to increase the amount of tuition fees for foreign students. It's a way to get more money, as it has been said before, in order also to have this money to have more quality in education, to renovate part of the building, but it's not the only solution that we can have for that. So for now, the level of tuition fees in France is quite low compared to other countries. I won't cite the country like US, even England. England is 10,000 more than 10,000 euros per year. So, but in these countries, they develop a lot of scholarship, grants, loans to allow students to pursue their studies.
Manos Antonionis, what does it take to attract foreign students right now?
It's a very good question. Definitely takes more public spending, because evidence shows that the more a country invests in its tertiary education system, eventually the more students come over time. But you're right to pose this question, because fees is only one factor that attracts students. Cultural affinity, of course, has been very important for the type of students that France has been attracting. But tertiary education has become internationalized, and France is lagging behind in terms of the resources that it's raising from that. As far as I know, 4.5 billion euros came to France per year, according to the most recent count, but countries like Canada or Australia raised 25 or 30 billion euros per year. And countries have come with increasingly a very diverse way to attract students. And one that is really particularly powerful is the ease of visas, and secondly, the opportunities that you give to students after graduation to enter the labor market. And here, some countries have been particularly innovative, trying to attract and retain the talent that comes out of their universities. And at the end of the day...
How does France score on that, when it comes to visas? Because I know it was one of the mantras of the previous president, François Hollande, to have more student visas, for instance.
Yes, as far as I know, the current reform already was proposed about 3 years ago with a government report that pretty much proposed very similar measures. But of course, it takes time to adjust and to take some of these bold steps forward. So France has not been doing very well on those fronts, and that's why both the facilitation of visas and, for the first time, incentives for students to stay after graduation. For those who have master's degrees, if I understand correctly, they can eventually come back to France and set up a new business or continue their studies. So that means that so far the situation was not really helping these students who had these aspirations and these longer-term plans. And the policy is quite comprehensive in the sense that it tries to cover many other areas.
All right, Ilana Sikirad mentioning France boasts 325,000 foreign students, the most of any non-Anglophone country. 45% of them come from either North Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa. They are essentially francophones. Will they be able to keep coming? It's a report from our correspondents in Morocco, read by Josh Vardy.
Bad news for the tens of thousands of Moroccan students who are preparing to register for French university. Their fees are set to multiply between 11 and 16 times, according to the level of study.
It's too expensive for our parents, so I'm going to change my plan. I'm going to go to another country. Why not? Or I'll graduate and do my master's here in Morocco.
This increase in fees is part of the Welcome to France plan. The program also triples the number of scholarships awarded to foreign students.
We know that our students, like others, often have difficulties in their first year in France, difficulties to find housing, to integrate into university life, to understand how it works. So the idea behind it is really to give a better experience with lightened visa procedures and on-site tutorials.
Questions still remain before the 2019 school year starts, and parents of students already in French education want them answered.
What we're asking for is an exemption for those with a French qualification, because it's the standard procedure and it's the reason why they chose to study in French in the first place.
A concern shared among higher education professionals.
It's the complete opposite of what we expected. The idea was to set up bridges that allow young people to leave, to be students in France and return home. Now only the privileged will be able to leave.
Those on modest incomes are already considering Turkey or China, while the Moroccan government hopes to increase their foreign student intake by up to 500,000.
Ilana Sikirad, your response, you heard there that accusation that it's only the well-off that will now be attracted to France.
So this is exactly what we want to avoid, and it will be done. And you don't have, and you should also remember that there is all these scholarships, but also there is another aspect of Welcome to France, which is the partnerships with university, between the French universities and North African or African universities. And for these students, it will be for free. So in a way, we are in the worst moment to evaluate, because people have this jump and not the excellency, because we have not been able yet to do what we want to do for them. So it's very important to have an attractiveness founded on quality, and we see the result. If it's only for the low fees, it's not possible to continue this way.
Because you heard Daniela mention how, and you used to teach at the same university, at the University of Paris. You know, you need more than just a new coat of paint for the classrooms if you're going to attract people with the higher fees.
Exactly, but we won't do it without money, and so we need this money. But we need this money not to sacrifice, we don't want to give up this tradition of solidarity. And I want really to. What is heartbreaking is to hear all the students who have decided to come to France has to be considered, really. So even if they change, and it will be the case, because I hear you, and I think it's very important. Everyone can understand that if you had made the choice with a certain idea of the fees, it's really, in a way, not fair to be badly surprised. So it will be taken into account, and I want to say that. So there is a plan, but I am sure that it will be case by case. A case-by-case solution will be found, because I agree with you that it's not fair. But still, to offer a bad quality welcoming for
so there'll be higher fees, but the quality will be improved, is what you're saying. When we come back, we're going to be taking a look at why it is so strategic to draw foreign students for a country like France. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We've been discussing the decision by the French government to increase steeply the foreign student tuition fees. This is for university students. We've been talking about it with Ilana Sicurel. She's with Emmanuel Macron's La République En Marche National Executive Committee in charge of culture and education there. Corinne Ekman, coordinator of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD's Education at a Glance report. Manos Antoninis, director of the Global Education Monitoring Report. Similar to what the OECD does?
Well, the report has the mandate to monitor progress on education in all countries, especially the progress towards education in the Sustainable Development Goals, and that is the international agenda. And it's a very interesting dimension to that, because one of the targets that was introduced in 2015 to be achieved in the first 5 years of the agenda is an increase in scholarships, to be provided to students from developing countries. And that's a very controversial target that many in our community are a bit skeptical about, because we know that equity is the main driver of this development agenda for the whole world. And scholarships often go to those mobile students from poorer countries that actually are not poor themselves. Because I can mention a number of examples in our World Inequality Database on education. We have shown that in countries that attract students here in France, so Cameroon, Togo, even Senegal, now no poor student, no poor young person ever graduates or ever attends university in these countries, let alone they ever will have a chance to emigrate and be students abroad. So giving scholarships has to be very carefully determined and administered, because it may well end up with those nationals that are actually already quite well off. So there's a choice to make between merit-based scholarships and actually need-based scholarships. And that's a key policy that needs to be taken.
Let's get the reaction on that from a 20-year-old, excuse me.
Yes.
20-year-old, Daniela Suzanne Bar-Rosas, undergraduate law student at the University of Paris, one who came from her native Peru to study here in France. Your reaction to what you just heard Manos say regarding scholarships and the idea of whether or not you have to boost them.
Okay, when I came first last year, I came with a scholarship, actually. The French government didn't pay my rent, but they give me this little apartment, we call it a studio, in one of their residents, so I paid a little. But this year, they said me there were more scholarships, so I had, like, in 1 month to find another apartment to pay, because I didn't pay the fees, the fees for university the first year too. So for me, it was super difficult, and the idea of not knowing if you are going to get a scholarship each year is what afraid me the more. And then I want to tell something like very important. I think we are forgetting why it's important to have this multicultural education. For me, I think that's the base of how we construct knowledge. Like how we construct, that's why France, they are in the best of countries in education, because they build their intellectual richness with people from all the countries. It's better to talk about, I don't know, the international issues, for example, Kosovo and Serbia, with my best friend who is from Serbia, and talk about US and Mexican issues with my best friend that is from Mexico.
But Manos's point is that the problem is that very often the people who get scholarships are already well-to-do in their own countries. And so the difficulty is really targeting those who need it most, is what he's saying.
The thing is that it's really difficult to know who need it. Because when I think about, let's say it, like the poor people in my country, they are not coming to France to study. There's like the middle class who is coming, who can pay a little bit, as me, like who can pay the rent, who can pay this 160 fees each year.
160 euros.
Yeah, yeah, and not almost 3,000. So that's the problem. Like the target can be really fast dismissed. And I couldn't have a scholarship the second year, so I was alone. And that was my problem, because I am a middle-class student, and I'm not poor, but I cannot pay that amount of money. So it's very difficult to just choose students between all of them.
In the report we saw at the end of part one there, Cory Nickman, we heard one of those the Moroccan students talking about how they didn't know whether they were going to come, and some of them had told our correspondent, well, maybe instead we'll go to Turkey or to China. Your thoughts on that?
There is a lot of students who are coming from Morocco in France, and it's more than 10% today of Moroccan in France. I think going to China may be also very difficult for them because they will have also to pay. Turkey, I don't know how the system is doing, but they will probably have the same. That for sure, for now, we have some very strong link with Morocco. It's the reason why there is so many students, and so the new law that will come up with this increasing tuition fees, we should ensure, the government should ensure that there's this possibility for those students to get the necessary scholarship to continue to come, and to ensure that those scholarships go to the good student, not those who can pay for these tuition fees.
Mm. Let's take a look at the countries that welcome foreigners. France is in competition for the bright minds from around the world. And it's the number one, as we said at the outset, among non-Anglophone countries. But it's fallen to fourth place behind Australia. And so we see in those findings how well, what do you make of those? Let me ask you. I'll begin with you, Cory Nickman. Yes. What do you make of this rank of the countries that host the most foreign students? And got to remember, in the United States, for the most part, and we can look at the trend here, it's still on the rise. Even though in the United States, it costs a lot more to go to university than it does in France.
Yeah. United States is well known to receive a lot of foreign students, but what we can see in our trend data that the share of students going to US begin to decrease, and it increases in other countries. And we see some other countries like China, some other India, who are increasing the number of foreign students going to their country. France now still attracts a lot of a lot of students. We have 40% of our doctorate, which are for foreigners. So it's also the prestige of France and of its universities to continue to attract these PhD students, and so that's for those countries like US, we see that they continue to attract, but the student has to pay this very high tuition fees, and it's more higher for foreign students because also they differentiate. If we look at UK, Australia, or New Zealand, it's fourth time. The tuition fees is fourth time higher for foreign students compared to national students. So it's also policies that apply in other countries.
Policies that apply in other countries. And again, there's this... there's also this accusation that there's a brain drain, and that the brain drain is working sort of in two ways, right? It goes from the developing world here to Europe, and then at the graduate level, from Europe to the United States. Is that true, Manos?
Yes, we covered actually this issue in our latest report, the 2019 Global Education Monitoring Report, that was focusing on migration and displacement. And we had an entire chapter dedicated to the internationalization of higher education, student mobility, and the risk of brain drain.
Is it like with the rest of capitalism, where, again, the richest and the best are all attracted to one place and the rest of the world gets crumbs?
It's true that there are countries that really suffer from brain drain, from very, very large percentage of their skilled people emigrating. The possibility of moving abroad also has some incentives, because students, knowing that they may have a potential to emigrate, to have better opportunities, also invest more in education in their home country. So it depends at how high these immigration rates are. But yes, there is no doubt that there is now very, very strong competition between some of these richest countries that we saw on the chart, because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, higher education has become a business, and therefore there are really all sorts of marketing tricks that being used by countries to attract more students to their campuses. And here, what is very interesting to say about France is its education policy is also linked to its development policy. And there is a potential dilemma here. Should France invest more in scholarships for students to come to France, or should France actually grant resources to African countries to help build its own tertiary education system? Because essentially that's what these countries need more in order to develop. They need good universities that really also keep their students there and provide much more opportunities for their future.
Ilana Sicurel, where do you lie on this divide? Is it better for the French state to invest in its own universities and attract the best and the brightest, or, as Manos was saying, help developing countries develop their own universities?
You will not be surprised to hear me say en même temps, both. Because I think the dilemma has been very well described, but we have to do both. And that's what is in the strategy that we are describing right now. I spoke about these partnerships. And this is exactly the idea. Part of the partnerships is to do study together, to give, money and to enable these countries to develop their own universities. And at the same time, having some students coming to France. And so this is the idea. So I would answer both. But I want to insist on the fact that, in a way, when you hear, what have been described, we are not right now in a system which is rational, because it's as if you had decided to give scholarships to everybody, even to well-off families. So the idea is to give to the students who really need it, and to have really a good way of evaluating the situation of each student. But on the other side, being able to ask a reasonable fees, very reasonable fees to those who can afford it, and to improve the conditions that are not really satisfying for everybody.
And here's where it gets a little uncomfortable. France has a constitution where the right to higher education is written into the constitution.
But it is, you cannot consider that the situation is the same for a French students whose family has paid the taxes all the lifelong, and somebody who is coming from abroad. It's logic. Nevertheless, we are very attached to what you described, and the idea is not to have only French students in the French universities, but on the contrary, to have more international students, because we know it's a richness for them and for us. So, but this is not. It is linked to the tax. You cannot. Everybody can understand that.
We heard in part one of our discussion, Ilana saying that she's aiming for a case-by-case basis where those who are here can continue with their education. Daniela, let me ask you, what's your ambition once you graduate? Is it to work here, or is it to make your life back home in Peru?
My ambition is to help my country, and I will work in which can be done for that. My plan was to do a master here. Now I have to think about that again, because, we said we are going to see each case, but there's 2,000 Peruvian students, for example, and I know for sure there's going to be not 2,000 scholarships. So the thing is that I will never forget Monday 18, when I was in the criminal law class, and I just see the news, and I listen the minister saying that the fees are going to go a lot, they are going to change. And I couldn't believe a country that welcomed me, like only last year, with this pillar that equity that had formed this country, had said me that I will not be able to continue studying here. And I think this law is discriminatory from not only the African students, but only the Latin American students and the Asian students. So that's my opinion.
But you should not be concerned, because you should not be concerned by this change.
My particular case? Okay, not the next year, but when I go to master, I will have to pay that amount of money.
It's not sure, but it's a good point, and it has to be think upon.
How do reforms go? What's the record in France when it comes to education reforms? Do they stick to the letter of the law? Do you get the equivalent of a Brussels fudge? Does it get watered down? What happens?
Difficult question. What is important is when there is a law, it's important to evaluate it and to see how it goes afterwards. It's a problem that we have in France. That we have many different governments who try to improve the education, and which is great. And but we didn't take the time to evaluate the different reforms. So this reform too, will need to be evaluated and to see whereas the equity has decreased over the year, or if the increase of the scholarships that you were talking about has been real, and there is no student left behind, which is really important. So,
is it sufficient?
Yeah.
We'll have to see if it's sufficient. By the way, there's another aspect of education, higher education reform that's created some dissent in the ranks. And this is the decision to do away with 500 tenured research positions at the National Center for Scientific Research, the CNRS we call it, with a plan instead to add 3,000 postdoctoral positions.
The real question we're faced with is the question of the attractiveness of careers. France is attractive early on in people's careers. Even today, over 30% of the researchers we hire are international. But these researchers aren't attracted by the French public sector. These people are very flexible, and they usually end up leaving the country after 5 or 10 years.
Is that really the case, Ilana Sicurel, that the researchers come here, so we don't need to invest quite as much in tenured positions? Instead, let's just invest in the more precarious postdoctoral positions. Is that a smart trade-off?
I'm not sure. I will answer this question because I mean part of the analysis of the minister has been cut, so I'm not sure I understood the question.
Well, she was asked why can't we? The question that was the journalist at the France Inter radio station asked her was, why can't we do both? Why can't we have keep those, because there's a lowering every year. They're going to stop hiring 500 extra researchers, tenured positioned researchers, and instead hire 3,000 postdoctoral students who don't have the tenure and who don't.
Apparently, the analysis has been that we need to reinforce, I mean, the doctorates and the new researchers. So. I think. Will somebody comment on it?
Yeah, what we know that in France the doctorate is not compared to other countries, the level of, for example, salary that you get after a PhD is very low compared to other countries. Master and doctorate in France are equivalent in terms of employability, in terms of salary, which in other countries...
It's hard to compete with like the United States, the likes of the United States, where...
Yeah, there is large difference, and in other countries too. So it's why also it's maybe a reason why there is few national students who are doing a doctorate in France. And the fact that we have 40% of foreign people doing a doctorate, it's also because there is few national students compared to in other countries. So the attractiveness of doctorate in France could be improved for different reasons. But
what do you think of this strategy?
Well, I think it goes beyond education in many ways. It seems to be aligned with other attempts to make labor markets more flexible, and of course that does raise a lot of concerns about the opportunities of people and the incentives they have in investing in their careers when these opportunities seem to be curtailed. It's, as I said, not necessarily an education policy, it's more of a labor market policy.
All right, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you so much, Manos Antoninis. I want to thank you, Lana Sicurel, Corinne Heckman, and Daniela Suzani Bar-Rosas. Good luck with your studies.
Thanks.
Stay with us because Media Watch is next. Okay, no problem. And we say hello to Charlie James.
Hello there. So most of the reaction that I was able to find online was not in support of these rates being increased, which maybe isn't surprising. But I brought you some comments from students talking about how this will affect them and how it will affect students in general. First, in The Connection, which is an English language site for French news, one Egyptian student studying at Sciences Po talked about how because 45% of foreign students in France come from Africa, that students from developing nations are going to be disproportionately impacted by these rate hikes. She writes, when you colonize a country for decades and enforce the teaching of your language on millions of people around the world, it only seems fair to allow them to pursue their education in the language that was imposed on them. So also saying that countries that were colonized are going to be affected by this and that that's not fair.
And this raises another issue which we didn't bring up, which is Sciences Po is one of those elite schools, the grandes écoles. And France has this two-speed system between the public universities and the grandes écoles. The grandes écoles, of course, are not affected by this, are they?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons that students prefer to go to the grandes écoles than to pursue their study in doctorate, and because it's well known in France.
Also wanted to bring you some reactions from students who were responding to Edouard Philippe's tweet talking about
Prime Minister.
Prime Minister Edouard Philippe's tweet talking about how rich foreign students shouldn't pay the same as lower income residents in France. And there were a lot of students who wrote back saying this concept is not true. One here saying, Mr. Prime Minister, I am a foreign student who is far from wealthy. This measure is anything but attractive. Wealthy foreign students don't go to France. They go to Canada or the US, where teaching is much more advanced. He continued, at this rate, I would prefer to study in Germany and pursue free studies there, where teaching is also more developed than France. I therefore invite you to think carefully whether this is a welcome or a goodbye measure. Another student responding to the same tweet saying, did you know that my father and mother's pay equals 900 euros per month and therefore much less than the minimum wage? They had to save for 20 years so I could come here. So this not popular with current students who are disputing some of the reasoning given behind it. We also saw French politicians going online to dispute this. Benoît Hamon, who ran in the 2017 presidential election as the head of the Socialist Party, said you should use the hashtag outside rather than the cynical welcome to France when you are in fact stopping African students by imposing this prohibitive tuition increase on them. You shame the tradition and mission of French universities. So some strong words there. So, there was a piece in the Times Higher Education that argues that it's not actually the price tag that's keeping France from being able to attract more foreign students. It's the quality of education, and that's where the emphasis really needs to be put. The people who were defending the increases, often you'd see them saying, you know, even with these hikes, it's still much cheaper in France than it is in the UK or the United States. So that was something that if you look at the debates around this on social media, a lot of people saying, I can't believe that you're upset about this. Do you know how much I pay to go to school in the US?
Okay, well, this is a debate, of course, that will continue. I want to thank you so much, Charlie James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.